This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's special guest is a man I've admired and respected immensely since he first began coming into our living rooms in 1991 with his Emmy-award-winning daytime talk show, which educated, enlightened, and inspired us for over 17 years. The list of accomplishments this man has achieved is nothing short of monumental. He served 22 years in the United States Marine Corps and the U.S. Navy as a special duty intelligence officer and received a whole slew of awards, medals, and commendations, culminating in 2008 with the Navy Superior Public Service Award for his continuous support and recognition of our servicemen and women and their families. He was the first African-American man to host a syndicated daytime talk show, the Montel Williams Show, and since the show ended in 2009, his career has blossomed and diversified even further. As an actor, he's appeared in many iconic shows, including Perry Mason, The Case of the Telltale Talk Show host, Matt Waters, Touched by an Angel, Jag, The Sopranos, My Name is Earl, and Guiding Light, which earned him an NAACP Image Award nomination. He also has two shows on the Lifetime channel, Military Makeover, which transforms the homes and lives of military families across the country, and he's a co-host of the popular morning talk show, The Balancing Act. He's written 9 best-selling books, Mountain, Get Out of My Way, Life Lessons and Learned Truths, Life Lessons and Reflections, Practical Parenting, A Dozen Ways to Sunday, Stories of Hope and Courage, Body Change, Climbing Higher, Living Well, 21 Days to Transform Your Life, Supercharge Your Health, and Feel Spectacular, Living Well Emotionally, Breakthrough to a Life of Happiness, and most recently, The Sailing of the Intrepid, the incredible wartime voyage of the Navy's iconic aircraft carrier. Since being diagnosed with MS in 1999, our guest has been a passionate advocate for patients worldwide. He works diligently in support of research and education for MS and traumatic brain injury. He's an outspoken supporter of Partnership for Prescription Assistance, which helps low-income patients get free or low-price prescription drugs. He's a leading advocate for medical cannabis law reform in America, and he hosts a popular podcast called Let's Be Blunt with Montel, which provides education and information on the cannabis industry. He also has another podcast called Free Thinking with Montel, which covers a wide range of topics from wellness to veterans issues. His commitment to social justice is exemplary. He's executive produced compelling documentaries about pressing social issues like anti-Semitism, racial profiling, mental health, and the Armenian genocide and persecution of Christians in the Middle East. His record of public service is both voluminous and transformative. Over the years, he's been actively involved in charities promoting diversity, the welfare of children, animal rights, and the well-being of our military and veterans. He's worked with the Fisher House Foundation, the Ann Romney Center for Neurological Diseases, the Research and Recognition Project, and Athletes for Care. I'm delighted and deeply honored to welcome the legendary Montel Williams to our show. Montel, thank you so much for being here.
Wow, Harvey, thank you so much for that great introduction. Thanks.
I want to start by paying tribute to your father, Herman Williams Jr., who served for over 40 years with the Baltimore Fire Department. He was Baltimore's first Black fire chief. You must be so proud of him.
I am. He was the first African-American fire chief of any major city in America. Had a long career with the fire department. But in between that, while he was with the fire department, he left the fire department for a couple of years, became the commissioner of transportation for Baltimore, the deputy commissioner of public works for Baltimore, then went back to become the fire chief. So he held 3 cabinet posts in the city. Did well. Unfortunately, he's left us, but his legacy will live on.
Well, it certainly lives on through you. I should also point out that you, sir, were the first Black Marine selected to the Naval Academy Prep School to then go on to graduate from the U.S. Naval Academy and be commissioned as a naval officer. Congratulations to you, sir, and thank you for your service.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate that.
Do you think being in the military for so many years was good preparation for a career in show business?
I think in some ways it's kind of like the antithesis, but what it did do is it gave me a focus that was, like sharpshooter focus. And so when I left the military to start the career in television, there was so much I didn't know, so much I wasn't prepared for, so much I had to learn very quickly. And the military did give me the skill to be able to do that as fast as I could.
Now, as host of the Montel Williams Show, you filmed almost 3,800 episodes. You interviewed over 36,000 guests.
Harvey, what was crazy? We were doing some digging a couple of days ago, and I realized I've been telling people it was 3,700 shows. We did 4,200 shows, but go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Wow, that's even more impressive. Well, you interviewed everybody from Luther Vandross, Maya Angelou, Rosa Parks, Celine Dion, Kenny Rogers, Muhammad Ali, even Mike Tyson, and the astronaut Sally Ride. Were you ever starstruck by any of your guests?
I think I was starstruck by almost all of them, even the ones that their names aren't as familiar. I interviewed a young man, and I'm sorry, again, out of 27, almost 3,100, I'm sorry, 31,000 different names. I can't give you his name right now, but I interviewed a young man who, I'll never forget that interview. He's a little boy who was 7 years old, who literally, the only reason I had him on was because he was raised by a single mother, a mother who found out in the latter part of her life that she had a severe brain tumor. And she was post-military. And she was so afraid that the system was going to, completely envelop her child. So she basically set about the last 3 months of her life training this little boy to take care of himself, training him to the point that she literally filled the closet in her bedroom with envelopes with money in it. One for the gas and electric, one for this, one for that, one for phone, money for food, money for this. And then she showed him how to make his way to and from the grocery store, how to cook in the kitchen, how to go pay his bills. She passed. And when she passed, she literally fell dead in her kitchen. He was so concerned about living up to her expectation that he basically took a towel, put it over her face so he could not see her deteriorate, and literally sprayed her with perfume from her room every day. Lived with her body on the floor in his house for almost a month and a half. Went to school every day. The only thing that really ended up giving it away was that he got some gum stuck in his hair, had to cut it out, had a friend come over his house, he was 8, another 8-year-old boy come over his house, cut his hair, and the little boy saw his mother on the floor and went home and told the mother. And that's how he ended up getting found out. But he was going to try it. He was determined to stay and do exactly what his mother said he should do. And that is basically take care of himself.
Such a heartbreaking story. It's unbelievable the human tragedies and triumphs that you've actually sat firsthand and been able to absorb. And of course, when you got to meet and talk with so many famous people, and then you became super famous yourself, Montel, did you ever figure out the best way to manage fame and still maintain a sense of balance and emotional well-being?
I think I did. I really can, because I tell you from my perspective, though, fame is something that's so fleeting, but at the same time, that's not what should drive you. What should drive you should be your mission. And if things come out of that are good, then so be it. But for me, it was always about the mission. And my mission was always to try to figure out a way to not belabor what happened as much as I try to figure out why things happen and come up with solutions. That's been really my whole life, is trying to dig deeper, trying to peel that onion, try to get to the core of why things happen. We live in a society right now where people only listen to, the first 2 outer layers of an onion and forget about the rest of the onion that has value, has nutrition. And they won't even dig deeper because I know enough. Well, no, you don't know enough. There's always something more to learn. There's always something more to know. And there's always something more to share.
Oh, absolutely. And as much as it was a lot of fun seeing the big stars on your show, the story you just told about that young boy who lost his mother and tried to maintain himself as best he could despite that tragedy, is really what made your show so special, that you dealt with some of the social issues like child abuse, reproductive technologies, surviving sexual abuse, dealing with addictions, mental health. Was there ever a topic, Montel, that you refused to cover on your show?
I'll tell you what happened. This is really, really early. When I first started my show, now, this is really crazy. My show started in 1991, but my show started in a strange way. It started well before the normal release of new shows. My show started in May of 1991, not September of 1991. And because of that, when I went, I literally walked right out of a nonprofit and wear my uniform to walk on a set of a television show. And so one of the things that I was very thankful for is that my lawyers and my team at the time put together a really, really very, very, very good contract, a contract which you don't ever see in Hollywood and have never seen again since me. The only one I had one before me like it was Oprah Winfrey. And my contract read that I had 100% creative control, which at first, because of my lack of knowledge and I was still learning, they hired an executive producer that came on to work with me. And she was one who had worked for a couple of other talk shows. And the other talk shows, really appreciated her more tabloid kind of and salacious kind of topics. So I'll never forget in the first 3 months I was on the air, and my show created something that's called the slow rollout in television that's now a part of television worldwide. And what that meant was that I started off on first 11 stations and 20 stations and 30 stations and 40 stations. How much each month I was building stations. So they call that a slow rollout before I got my first national year, which started in 1980, beginning in January 1982. So they hired this producer for me, and she came on and she came to me and said, look, I just saw the show. Sally did this. Oprah did this. Donahue did this. I think we ought to do it because it really rated really well for them. And I was like, no, I can't. I can't. I'm not going to do that. She said, no, you have to. Look, I'm telling you, I know what I'm doing. This is really a great show. It's going to be a great idea. And I was like, And I remember the day I taped it, I kind of left fingernail marks down the hallway, because they were to drag me in the studio because I didn't want to talk to these people, period. And the show got started, and I specifically said one thing, okay, I'll do this show, but I'm not going to do it like the other ones did. And they agreed, okay, we'll just have him on the set. I said, fine. And then I remember when I went in there to do the show, I literally, we fortunately ran a little over on that show because we had enough to be able to cut it together into a full hour show. Because I literally in the last segment was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I got it. I turned on my microphone. I walked off the set, which is not the way we normally typically end the show. Well, that show ended up airing. And that show got letters from all of the stations that I was on, except for maybe one. And at the time I was on maybe 27. And all of the GMs of those stations were really not very happy with the show because they basically said, we hired you because we got you because we thought you were going to be different. If you're going to steep to this, then, I don't know if we really need to continue this relationship. And I walked into that executive producer's office that day and I said, you know what? I want you to pull my contract right now. Take a look at page whatever it was, 92. It says in there that I have 100% creative control. I do from this point on. You will never tell me what I'm going to do. You'll talk to me about what we think we could do. And then I'll figure it out whether we're going to do it or not. And you know what that topic was, Harvey?
I'm dying to know.
It was a topic called infantilism. Infantilism. It was some people back in that time who wanted to run around dressed up as babies and act like babies. So they wore diapers when they were home, a person who goes in the house and puts on their, NFL sweatshirt. Well, these people will go home and put on baby clothes and sit around and go goo goo gaga and, have people feed them. And I just literally, my mom called me. My mother called me and she said, baby, you don't have to do this. I know you don't have to do this. I said, Mom, you'll never see it again. I'll never let you down again. And I didn't. From that point on, I actually approved every single guest and every single topic that was on the Montel Williams Show.
And bravo to you for sticking to your instincts. Well, I don't know if you know this about me, Montel, but I was a criminal and family court judge for 26 years. Did you know that?
I did know that. I'm so impressed. Yes, sir.
Oh, wow. Well, the reason I mention it is because in 1995, shortly after I became a judge, you did an episode about a teenage boy fighting to adopt his half brother.
That show
And
won me the Emmy, believe it or not. But
well,
go ahead.
I want you to know that because of that episode, I saw numerous other teenagers who got the courage to do the same thing and protect their siblings from abusive parents. And I want to thank you publicly, Montel, as a member of the former member of the judiciary, for making a difference in the lives of so many kids.
I thank you so much. So that was, believe it or not, that show was a show that I ended up winning an Emmy for the next year.
And I didn't even know that, but I'll tell you, that was the show that got me really hooked on you. Now, you're an extraordinary interviewer. You yourself have been interviewed by every major talk show host in America and beyond. What would you say are the qualities of a good interviewer?
Number one is a good listener. You know, we often go into interviews with some, you do it. Maybe you do it, maybe you don't. I hope you don't. You know, you'll have a producer who will write you a whole list of questions. I think these are questions you should ask, and they give you an order. It's like, no. I can't do that. I can't even interview a person looking at a teleprompter. I can't do it. The reason why is because while I'm looking over here at the teleprompter trying to read the next question, they may say something that I didn't realize they were going to say that might be the answer to everything that they're talking about. Everything. The only reason why we're here, I'll give you an example. I had a young woman on my show who came on, and we were doing a show. This was supposed to be a fun, funny show. I had 3 different couples on backstage, and they were going to come on and talk about how their husbands, and this is back again in the 90s, so I'm sorry it was so, misogynistic, but how their husbands, wanted them to behave when they came home. So one woman, made sure she dressed in a little housekeeper outfit and would walk around and, fluff the house and fluff its head and all this kind of stuff. And, another woman, was complaining about the fact that her husband was such a clean freak that she would have to clean the grout in the kitchen floor with a toothbrush. And then another woman was saying, something else like funny. He wanted to make sure that, if he woke up, she had makeup on. So she had to put her makeup on. She had to have special pillowcases so that she could sleep at night with a full face makeup so that if he woke up, he saw the makeup. And so, it was all supposedly being done in jest, not being done because someone was being abusive. Well, my first guest sat down beside me, and this is the woman who was told that she had to clean the floors with a toothbrush. And she was sitting there, and we started off with the typical, tell me what's going on. And, she said, it's a big smile on her face. She was all happy. I've got a husband who's a clean freak. And, I even have to fold the washcloths in a particular way in the bathroom. And I have to make sure that, I do the triangle in the toilet paper and that kind of thing. And as she started speaking, I'm looking at her and I'm wondering, that smile that started like faded within 20 seconds. And now she was talking almost like robotically. And I was listening. And, then on that particular show, the producer literally did put a list of questions up on a teleprompter. So I looked over at the prompter and it was like some stupid question about, tell me about the perfume that you have to put in the laundry. And I looked back at her and said, so I'm not trying to make light of this. And I was like kind of laughing. I said, but, you don't seem to think this is as funny as, our audience and we do. And she then broke into tears and said, it's because he abuses me. And the guy was sitting in my front row and I had security there. And when she said that, his face changed, his demeanor changed. He got ready to take a step towards the stage. My security came running out, grabbed him, held him back. We ended up having to call the police. She was immediately taken over to a battered women's shelter. And, had I not been focused, listening, and paying attention to what she had to say, I might not have caught it because I would have been too busy looking at the camera, impressed with myself, rather than looking and staring at that guest beside me, recognizing she was in service. So I think, to me, the most important thing on any interview is to listen, because you're going to find gems in what they say that may take the interview in an entirely different direction.
That is such good advice, and it's so very true. And it shows really that you were really in the moment in your interviews. You were not pre-programmed, and you were willing to go wherever the guest wanted to take you.
Absolutely. And that's really, I got to tell you, some of my best interviews were that way. You spoke about some of the celebrities that I spoke with, and they my heroes, people who I respected beyond belief. But a lot of times celebrities are less of an open book and more of a closed book than we think. And, sometimes they will come to you with a list of questions that they would like you to ask. And I would always say, yeah, that's the reason why when you read off the list of celebrities, you only got to about 7, because I got tired of talking to people who are going to tell me what I'm going to say to you. If you want to talk to me, then you're going to talk to me. If you're not going to talk to me, then I don't need you. Bye. Have a nice day. And that's the reason why the majority of my shows were non-celebrity shows, and they were issue-oriented shows, and they were shows that literally delved into the human experience, because I wanted to literally. I was crazy, and I'll say it this way, but I did a show where the guests, after it was over, they still lived inside of me. I spent many hours studying every single show. And I was one of the only people in this entire industry to do 3 shows a day. So that was 3 separate guests. 3 separate shows full of guests. And back then, we was doing 8 guests a show, 8 to 9. So I would have to study for hours. It would take me 2 hours to prepare for one show. And in that 2-hour preparation, I demanded of my producers, and they thought I was crazy. But if I was going to meet and interview Harvey, I'd have probably 20 pages of notes on you. Not just, they would probably go into several of the cases that you covered, so that I might be able to lift one of those cases up and say, hey, what did you think of this case? And when you were talking to this person, what did they say? I really, and I didn't want to have that on a piece of card or a piece of paper in front of me. I needed to have this here, because in here, I could shift to something else as quickly as I would need to if, in fact, the answer came out different than I thought it was going to come out.
Well, then I got to ask you, given all of that, what was the fascination with Sylvia Browne? You had her on your show over 200 times. What made you keep inviting her back?
Sylvia is one of those topics that I got to tell you, as I look back on it, if I had the show to do again, would I have had her on as many times? Probably not. But would I have had her on almost as many times? Absolutely. The reason why she was on my show is that she would do one show and we would get 600, 700, 800 letters. It was one show we did with her. We got 30, almost 3,000 letters from viewers around the country and around the world. I want to talk to her. I'd love to talk to her. I'd love to talk to her. At one point in time, I thought to myself, again, I'm doing a show that is entertaining. There are people who find this entertaining. I started, and you can go back and see if you can find a copy of the open of any show that Sylvia Browne was on with me. I said in the open of every single show, hey guys, my open show was always this way. Welcome, 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 and thank you so much for joining us today. Today, I've got a guest on today that a lot of you guys keep begging me to bring back, so I brought her back. But let me just tell you something right now before we get started. First, her name is Sylvia Browne, and yes, she's the lady you call a psychic. But guess what, folks? I do not believe in psychics. I've never believed in psychics. I believe that this woman has maybe a little bit more brain mass in that area of intuition that the rest of us don't. When they finally did a autopsy on Albert Einstein's brain, they found out that instead of having the cleft that runs all the way down the back of your brain, all the way through your brain in the middle, he had more brain mass in the area in the back of the brain where we contemplate and think about math. And so maybe that was part of the reason why he was so smart as he was. The guy had an IQ of 200. So maybe that's what gave it to him. I think if they finally do an autopsy on Sylvia Browne, you're going to find that in the area of intuition, she's just got a little bit more brain mass, because let's get this straight. She is not 100% right. She runs, to my perspective, about 82 to 85% right, but she gets things wrong. So if you're going to stand up in this audience and ask this woman a question, make sure you're prepared for the answer. Let me say it twice. If you're going to stand up in this audience and ask this woman a question, make sure you're prepared for the answer. And then we would start the show. That was it. And that's how I believed and thought about her the entire time I knew her. I was around her and experienced some things that I can't, with my intuitive, intellectual, what do you want to call it?
Your logical mind.
Logical, I can't explain. I till today, I still cannot explain some things that this woman did. And she did it right dead in front of me, and there was no way she could know this. No way. I didn't give her the guess beforehand. I was blown away. But there were a couple times she said some things that I was like, really? She would say, yeah. I said, okay, well, if that's what you think. All right, and I move on. But I I never called her out for being wrong, but I made it very clear that I'm not sure about that one. But if you say it, so look, she did a show with me back in the middle of it was right in the early 2000s, talking about, Montel would be around 2021, 2020, 2021, 2022. The world's going to get hit with this plague. It's going to be a virus. I don't know where it's going to come from. The world's going to get with this virus. And she didn't say the name, but she said the world's going to get with this virus. And the next thing we got COVID. Okay, where did that come from? I'm not saying that she psychically predicted COVID, but where did that come from, Harvey? I don't know. And she did that so many times. That's the reason why she had a seat on my stage.
That is pretty remarkable. Now, the last episode of the Montel Williams Show aired on May 16th, 2008, and your ratings were still really high, Montel. Did you ever get an explanation for why the network canceled the show?
Well, believe it or not, Harvey, I canceled the show. And I'll tell you why. I won't give out names, but I will just say this. I did a show before I had Sylvia Brown on every Wednesday. I did a show that was called Montel Living Well Wednesdays, where I had a team of doctors on my show. And I would have a panel of 4 doctors and myself, and we would answer questions from the audience, answer questions from the viewers that were medically related questions. Another syndicating company literally stole that idea and turned it into a TV show that ended up running for like 14 years. And that other syndicator literally, behind my company's back, had a meeting with me trying to see if I would shift syndicators. And because I told them no, they went after trying their best to put this show that was my idea in my time slots around the country. When I heard about that, they were basically trying to sabotage the show. I had long conversations with my syndicator, and it was like, if they keep doing this, they're going to eat up by probably 60% of your stations. And I was like, no, that's not happening. So have a nice day. Take care. You're not going to protect me. You're not going to try to cover my back. That's okay. Have a nice day. Bye. Thank you. And I had been, I had been contemplating it there, but I'll tell you, 17 years, Harvey, and as you talk about it, we did more serious topics. Of course, I had Sylvia Brown, but we did more serious topics than any other show that was on the air. We were the shows that talked about the kidnappings. We were the shows that talk about AIDS, and not from some salacious standpoint. We were the show that talked about murder. We were the show that talked about wife and spousal abuse, child abuse. At that moment in time, and I think the reason why I made the decision was maybe the week before I had done 6 shows, and 3 or 5 of them were just brutal. You know what I mean? I mean, when I got done, I remember one of my dressing room crying a couple times because they were really, 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 really deep and emotional shows. And so when I heard this bad news, maybe I was just in a bad mindset for myself, but I was like, no, you're not going to do this to me. So I stopped, and I reached out to my syndicator and said, I'm done. I'm not coming back next year. Have a nice day.
You don't regret it, do you?
No, because I think it saved my mental health. It really did. Because again, like I said to you, a lot of the shows I did, they stayed with me. When I would go home, I'd be thinking about and contemplating those children or those people 2 days later and still worried about them. We were the only show on television at the time that had a staff psychiatrist part of the show's production that had the job of finding aftercare, not 5 minutes in a green room, but I'm talking you either live-in care or emotional support when they got back home. So, does I regret it? No. Now it's very, very interesting. I'll give you a little secret. I'm working on a project right now that hopefully might have me back in your living room, because what we're going to do is take a look at, again, 4,200 shows. I have a lot of shows. I just realized the other day that I interviewed more serial killers than anybody else in the world. There was a period of time I was literally on death row 5 times, interviewing serial killers on death row, sitting across from me in chains and shackles. I realized that because, I'm a big streamer. I like to watch streaming programs. So I was looking at something on Netflix the other day that was a story of a woman by the name of Eileen Wuornos. Do you know that name?
I've heard the name.
Eileen Wuornos is the first woman to actually have the title serial killer. She was a woman in Florida who was a prostitute that was on the road and ended up killing 7 of her clients. Everybody was trying to get her and do an interview, and she let me come into the prison with her and sit down across from her and interview. I was the first of a couple others I ended up doing later before she was finally executed. And I was watching that interview. I turned on the show and I'm watching it. And right out of the jump, the first thing she says, they bring her into this room, and the anchor that's going to interview her was in the room. And she was touching herself up with makeup. When Eileen Warner walked through the door, she goes, "Oh my goodness, that guy Montel Williams who interviewed me was putting that all over his head." And then she sat down and started the interview. And it was the first words out of her mouth. And I was like, what? I didn't even realize that she might even could have even remembered the interview with me. My wife was sitting there with me on the couch, and she said, wow. I said, "Oh, baby, I forgot to tell you, I interviewed 7 of these people." She goes, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "Yeah. I got more interviews than anybody with serial killers and more death row interviews than anybody's ever done." She said, "You ought to turn that into a show." And I said, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, you ought to see if you can get the copies of those and maybe do a show with you looking at those interviews 20 years ago and reflecting on them now because you know them all." And in that hour-long conversation that we had while we had a pause going on this Netflix show, I had literally talked to her about each one of the serial killers that I was with. And, it's very funny, Harvey. There's just certain things that I remember. And, if you could prompt me about a single guest on our show, I might guarantee you that out of the 38,000, I'm going to remember that interview. And if you give me time enough to just ponder it, I can remember the entire conversation that we had. So, I interviewed a guy by the name of Wesley Allen Dodd, who was a child serial killing child molester. I interviewed a guy who was the Hillside Strangler, Kenneth Bianchi. I interviewed the Night Stalker's wife, who ended up marrying him while he was on death row. I interviewed Eileen Warnos. I interviewed Christina Rigg. And in every single one of those interviews right now, I can remember things that they said to me. I can remember exactly Wesley Allen Dodd, when I interviewed him, and one of the things that was so crazy about him, he was being held in Walla Walla prison in Washington State and had been on death row for about 12 years, maybe it was 11 years, 11 to 12 years. And when he was first sentenced to death row, the way to execute a person in Walla Walla State was through hanging. But then the state banned hanging and turned it into lethal injection. Well, this clown petitioned the Supreme Court of the state and the Supreme Court of the country and said, if you change my method of execution now, you are literally doing me, indomitable pain and suffering. And this is unnecessary pain and suffering because I've lived for 11 years thinking I was being hung. If you're going to execute me, you got to hang me. And the state of Washington said, the dude's right. Sent it to the Supreme Court. Got to the Supreme Court, and they said, hang his ass. Excuse my mouth. If that's what he was, hang him. Because I think he was really trying to see if he could get away with getting his commuted to life sentence. And they said, no, he wants to be hung, hang him. So they ended up hanging him. And then he threw another monkey wrench in and demanded, because the warden had let him do the interview with me, he said, I want to ask Mr. Williams to come and film my execution. And I was like, no, buddy, I'm sorry, ain't happening. I'm not going to martyr you. Go to your maker. Goodbye. Have a nice day.
That idea of an anthology series where you collect the certain themes from your catalog of shows is a really great idea. And I'm wondering, some people say that the talk shows of the 90s, like yours, were the predecessors of reality television. Do you agree with that?
At 1,000,000%. Reality TV was born out of talk shows. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Though they may have changed the way they produced them, because there's not normally a single host with all the reality shows, but all the reality shows get all the reality people together and then have a single host interview them anyway. So, yes, the reality TV came and was born out of talk.
I want to mention something. In 2020, you received a Daytime Emmy nomination for a documentary you executive produced about anti-Semitism called Hate Among Us. And I want you to know, Montel, as a member of the Jewish community, how much I appreciate that film. I think it's even more relevant and necessary today than it was when you made it.
Absolutely, sir. I fortunately had a producer. I work with a production company called Associated Television. A particular producer, his name is David McKenzie, And Dave McKenzie is a man who literally just respects humanity and is always looking to try to do something that can change or at least reverberate in our society to help us all become better people. And so Hate Among Us was one of those that I was just so blessed to be a part of.
Well, I want to mention another really important documentary you executive produced a few years ago. It's called Unconditional. It's about mental health. What drew you to that project?
It's one that we don't, because, I know you know this, and a lot of people know I suffer from MS. And because I suffer from MS comes with some psychological damage and depression and things that a lot of people don't know that the sufferer is suffering from because, especially people with MS, we try to hide as much of our symptoms as we can from everybody that we can hide them from. And it just it made me realize that, we've got to stop treating this like a stigma. Mental health issues are a part of humanity. I don't know if you're a religious person, mental health issues are part of what God gave us. He gave them to us for us to be able to deal with ourselves so that we can interact better with others. And, if we don't accept them, help those people who suffer from them live normal lives and live meaningful lives, what good are we doing with anything else that we do?
Well, you've been very public about your health issues, living with MS. You overcame a stroke in 2018.
Yes.
Tell me, Montel, how's your health? How are you feeling?
I'm hanging pretty tough, my friend. I really am. I work out and exercise, try to every day. I try to pay attention to my health, my mental health every day. I meditate. I try to do some focused thinking almost every single day so that, and I check in with myself. I think one of the crazy things is we, for some reason, have this notion that if we talk to ourselves, there's something wrong with us. But if you can't talk to you, then who can you talk to? And you need to spend time with yourself, understanding why you click the way you do. Why do you respond to things the way you do? I don't hesitate to question myself if I have an interaction that didn't go as well as I wanted to go. I try to figure out what was my role in making that interaction as bad as it was, not what the other person's role was. And how could I have done things better? If more of us took more time to reflect on our footprint, our life footprint could make a difference in the life footprints of so many more.
See, I started the interview by asking you whether your involvement in the military all those years was a good preparation for show business. And what you're really demonstrating to me is that you have no ego. And that may have come from the military or may have come from your upbringing, but you are one of the few celebrities I've ever met who really is so focused on doing good and on finding solutions that you just don't have an ego.
Depending on the religion, and I don't try to say that I am, a 100% Kabbalist, but I do practice some of the tenets of Kabbalah as I practice some of the tenets of several other religions on the planet. And one of those in Kabbalah is that we know that it looks at ego as the devil.
Well, when you look back at your career, you've conquered every element of the entertainment industry. Is there any mountain left that you want to climb?
Oh, so many more. I gave you that idea about, I'm thinking about doing a show that's kind of like, a kind of a sit down look at kind of a package of different types of topics that I covered on the show, but I'm also working on a couple of other projects right now. Keep your fingers crossed for me, Harvey, but we've got some interest in Sailing of the Intrepid to possibly turn into either a feature or a streamer, 8 or 9 episodes, and not a documentary feature or stream, but a creative one. So I'm working real hard right now at that. So there's so much more. Look, I look at life this way. I may be in what we consider my fourth quarter right now, but guess what? I can still score a touchdown in the last second.
Darn right you can. How would you like to be remembered by the world?
A person who understood his responsibility, a person who lived not for self alone, and a person who figured out how to define himself throughout his life rather than let anybody else define me. I'll never live down to or up to anybody else's expectations but my own. And if I can share that with people to make them understand that that's how they should live their lives, then I've done my best. Unfortunately, and please, I don't say this, oh, woe is me, or oh, woe is anybody else. When I leave here, yeah, there may be the memorial service, there may be the retrospective look at my career, but the next year I'm gone. If you look back in life, on this planet, we've probably had close to 14 billion people live on this planet since man became an intellectual being who was aware of who they were. Out of 14 billion, how many can you name? How many can I name? I can sit down right now and write a list of probably 200 names. It's 200 out of 14 billion. I'm going to be lucky if I make anybody's list.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I think you're going to be remembered by in the modern age, and that is that you really embraced the concept of using your platform for good. It wasn't just to make a living or to have a successful enterprise. It was to find solutions. It was to do something constructive, something positive, something to inspire people. I think if you're going to be famous and if you're going to be on a big medium like television in our living rooms every day, which you've done for years and still doing on the internet, there should be something good at the base of it. And I think you were one of the first people to really embrace that.
Thank you, sir. Well, the old saying, a living is made by what you get, a life is made by what you give.
Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Montel Williams. You didn't just do well in your life, you did good. It's been an incredible honor and privilege to meet you, sir.
Same here, sir. And thank you so much for that story about the young man that you saw your show. That was one of those shows that stuck with me.
Thank you for all the hours of education and insight and compassion and advocacy you've given the world. Thank you for all the books you've written. And most of all, thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show. I know you don't give a lot of interviews, and I'm very honored that you shared your time with me today.
Thank you, sir. You keep it up. You keep going strong. And for all those viewers that are out there that watch you on a daily basis or tune into you, keep doing it, because Harvey's got it going on for sure.
Thank you so much, Montel. That means the world to me. Our guest has been the incomparable media personality, inspirational speaker, author, entrepreneur, humanitarian, and social justice advocate, the legendary Montel Williams. For more information about Mr. Williams and his TV shows and podcasts, please visit his official website, montelmedia.com. You can also follow him on Facebook, Instagram, and X. My name's Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producers, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli of the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my editor, Isaiah Sharalampidis, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.